Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast. Our podcast features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to quality early learning and care, with a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. You're most welcome to the final episode of this series, where we explored some aspects of equality, diversity and inclusion. My guest for this episode is Shirley Heaney. Shirley is the National Coordinator of the Linc programme, and she's a graduate of the ECCE programme in Mary Immaculate College in Limerick. Shirley has worked with the Linc programme since it began in 2016. During this time, she's been engaged in various roles, including content developer, tutor and project officer, and now, as I say, she's the National Coordinator. Before she joined the Linc programme, Shirley lectured in the Department of Reflective Pedagogy and Early Childhood Studies in Mary I, and she worked for 10 years with children with additional needs and 3 years with children from the Irish Traveller community and their families. And she's currently a PhD candidate with the Department of Reflective Pedagogy and Early Childhood Studies in Mary I. And her research is focused on the investigation of how the well-being of children with additional needs is supported in the early years. So Shirley, very busy schedule you have going there, and thanks for joining us. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today to wrap up this series.
Thanks, Maura, and thank you for inviting me and join your podcast. I'm delighted to contribute.
So you're very welcome. So I'll start with what led you to be so interested in the area of anti-bias and inclusion?
Now, I suppose my interest in the whole area of inclusion, I suppose it stems from a lifelong interest really in the whole area of diversity and inclusion. I myself have a limb difference from birth, which has influenced my view of the importance of inclusion and the importance of building, I suppose, an inclusive society as a whole. And I really feel that this really needs to be supported and embraced beginning in the early years in order to have that inclusive society. So as you mentioned there, Maura, I've worked for, I suppose, almost 20 years now at this point in the area of inclusion, with in a professional capacity with children and lecturing, and now, I suppose, as the National Coordinator of the Linc programme.
So the we've had the inclusion charter and guidelines, the diversity, equality and inclusion charter and guidelines. They were initially published a good many years ago and reviewed then, and I know the Linc programme builds very strongly on them. How important do you think that has been, that government focus has been to, I suppose, kind of honing our thinking and practice in relation to inclusion, and how important it is to be familiar with and using the documents? I mean, Colette Murray said just take it off the shelf and use it. I'd like to hear kind of what your thoughts are on the guidelines and the charter.
Yeah, and absolutely. The Linc programme, one of the foundation, I suppose, documents is the inclusion charter and guidelines. So the charter and guidelines, I suppose, they're really key in supporting early childhood educators to consider the inclusive culture within their setting, providing environments that are respectful of diversity and inclusion, I feel, is everyone's responsibility. And I think that the charter captures that and provides guidance on what inclusion and diversity looks like or should look like in practice. And the ideas we can use, the think-abouts that are in the charter, to support reflection on our practice, both individually and as a team, and to decide as a team what might work best for the individual setting. So I suppose there's a number of important aspects to the charter and guidelines. It's a fabulous document. It's very user-friendly. Some aspects that I think are significant, I suppose, is the inclusion of that anti-bias approach and the anti-bias goals for children and for adults. And the Charter places on supporting their identity and their sense of belonging, which strongly links with Ashter. That's really important. And the role that the physical environment, I suppose, has in depicting all children, and the importance of that partnership approach with parents, which is key for all children, but especially children then, who may have additional needs, and of course the inclusion policy. So like you said, Colette Murray said, take it off the shelf. And, absolutely, I suppose the Charter is important as provides us with a document that supports, a vision for an early learning and care setting. And the vision, that the staff in the setting has, in relation to anti-bias can stem from this document. So if we consider, I suppose, the goals for adults, one of the goals for adults is to be conscious of our own culture, attitudes, values, and how they influence our practice. Okay, so this really challenges us to think about our own biases, which we all have, whether they're conscious or unconscious. And this is so important in building, I suppose, a shared vision of the inclusive culture within the setting. Talking with your colleagues about this, do we have unconscious biases, and where might these stem from? Bringing them to the fore, thinking about them, challenging them, and wondering, why might I think or feel this way? And I suppose in the podcast that you did, Maura, with Colette Murray, you spoke a little bit about gender, and play that was seen to be for boys or for girls, and he spoke about the construction area being labelled in a setting as the boys area. So like these kind of things are really important to be conscious of. Do we perceive certain types of play to be only for girls, and do we perceive certain types of play to be only for boys? Do we jump in very quickly if there is a child in our setting who has an additional need when they're about to zip up their coat? I suppose we link it to, I suppose, the whole concept of John Dewey's concept of reflection and the importance of reflecting in action and on action. Always taking that time to reflect on our interactions with young children and thinking to ourselves, can I do this better? Could I do this differently? And then to take the time to reflect as a team with with your colleagues in your setting as well. And I know this has been quite a challenge over the last 2 years for the majority of settings in relation to COVID. But I remember when I was doing my degree many moons ago now at this point in Mary Immaculate College, and one of my lecturers, Florence Deneen, spoke about Maria Montessori. So this was in the first couple of weeks of the degree, and she spoke about Maria Montessori's concept of, help me to do it for myself, helping children to do things for themselves. And I suppose that's something that really resonated with me and stuck with me in my interactions when I worked with young children. I think the key, and this is key, looking at a situation and always thinking to ourselves, how can I support this child to do something different? How can I support this child to do this independently? What strategies can I put in place? And so on. And I suppose the importance of interacting with your with your colleagues is really important here, with sharing strategies. And the role of the inclusion coordinator then, I suppose, can come in very strongly there in cascading their learning from the Linc programme on strategies that can be implemented in the setting, and other training that other staff members engage in as well.
Yeah, I think that bit, it was one of the things that that Maxine said, about that nearly bringing a social aspect to the reflections. And, she said about even that little bit of a challenge to change one thing. And, I think that's so important, is that, the more, and Nicola referred to this as well, the relationships bit. So, coming to a shared understanding of what inclusion means, but you can't kind of come to a shared understanding until you've kind of looked at your own understanding. And like you said, your own unconscious biases, and recognizing that we all have stereotypes in our head. We all have biases from the way we were reared, the communities we grew up in, and we need to challenge those for ourselves, but doing it in a kind of a social, easy way can make it easier to challenge it, rather than in a very challenging individual way, having that social aspect to it, where people aren't afraid to kind of open up and discuss things, and discuss some of the challenges. When you mentioned about children with additional needs being maybe over helped, when I worked on Ashler in Action, we had a video of a little girl putting on her welly, a little girl who had Down syndrome putting on her welly. It came off, and the educator's first instinct was to put the welly on for her. Yeah. And I was there, I was videoing, and I was kind of encouraging her to leave her to do it for herself. And she was, she spoke afterwards. The video unfortunately isn't visible anymore, but she spoke afterwards about how powerful it was to see that she actually could be supported to do it on her own. But her instinct as an educator was to help and to support. And sometimes the best way to help and support is by kind of standing back, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we want to help children, we want them to achieve their own true potential all of the time. And there always is, even for me, there's always that little second where you go to help, or you might think about helping, and you have to really stop yourself, and you need to think, can the child do this activity, or put on their wellies, or zip up their coat, or whatever it might be, open their lunchbox by themselves, or what aspect of it can they do themselves, and where does my support need to come in? So, that's why our observations then are really, really important. A child may be able to complete the first 3 steps of an activity or a task, but they might need you to come in and help them at the end, and over time they can do it independently. So it's about, and I suppose that's nearly an unconscious bias, but it's about stepping back and telling yourself, no, it's fine, I'm going to leave them try it themselves, see how they get on, and if they need my help, I'm here to support them, absolutely, but let's see how they get on. And look, we all know from working with children the absolute pride that children have, and the confidence they get the first time they zip up their own coat, or the first time they put on their own shoes or their own wellies, or whatever it might be. So they're important, I suppose, little milestones for children, and it's really important that we don't overstep or overhelp, as you said.
Yeah, can really feel counterintuitive as carers that, we want to show our care by helping, but in fact, sometimes we can show it by kind of standing back and waiting until the child actually needs the little bit of help.
Yeah, or stay near and just let them know that you're there if they need the support.
Exactly.
And if you need me to help you, let me know.
And do you want to say a little bit more about that relationship aspect to the reflection? You mentioned reflecting individually and then as a group, but how important those relationships are. I mean, sometimes I suppose we can focus on, that kind of shared thing of where we'll go next, but there's also a really important bit about recognizing what we're really doing well now. We tend to go into what we need to change, but do you think it's important too to recognize the aspects of good practice that are already there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would talk to students, a lot about that, the different student groups that I would have been engaging with over the years. It's really important to really think about that. So if we're thinking about the anti-bias approach, and that's our topic of conversation with our team, like when you're developing that relationship where you can talk about what biases that you might have, that needs time. You need to get the group together as regular as possible, which can be quite challenging in a large setting. But it is very important to come together as a team. And I always think that you always need to start with what's working well, have we implemented recently, and how is it going? As I think there can nearly be a focus at times to look at, okay, so there's this new document or there's this new strategy, how are we going to implement it? And that's brilliant. But I think a team also needs to look at what they're doing well, what's working well, how the children are getting on, and that's very important. So if you bring that back, I suppose, to Colette Murray's point about taking the inclusion charter and guidelines off the shelf, I suppose a way to start that would be to have a look at the inclusion policy. Have a look at the inclusion policy that you have in your setting. When was the last time that it was updated? Inclusion is a continuously evolving process, because children are different each year, the children in the group are different, and so on. So take the document, have a look at the inclusion policy as a team, and have a look. Is this inclusion policy reflective of what we're doing, what our vision for inclusion and diversity is in the setting, and so on. How thinking about, has your inclusion policy been influenced by the Universal Design Guidelines for Early Learning and Care Settings? That was published only a small few years ago. Okay, they're absolutely fantastic, and there's great tips and ideas in this document. And I feel that the Charter and the Universal Design Guidelines for Early Learning and Care Settings actually complement each other quite well. It's a wonderful document as well, and a great resource. With a self-audit tool as well, that's designed to help early childhood educators reflect on their environment, both indoors and both outdoors. So I think the first step in taking the Charter and guidelines off the shelf is maybe have a look at your inclusion policy, discuss it with your team, and always start with what's working well. There's so much high quality practice happening in our sector, and the efforts that have been made to communicate with parents during the pandemic and everything else. And children are spending more time outdoors, and this is impacting on the quality of the environments that children are engaging in as well. I suppose the more opportunities that team have to discuss and reflect together, the more trusting the team relationship then will become, and the more open the team members will be able to be in relation to discussing, their view of inclusion, or, any biases that they may have.
Yeah, that bit of trust is so important, because it's, when there's when trust is there, a comment feels much more like a reflection than a criticism. Yes. And people can generally kind of maybe, move forward in a more constructive way if they feel, that it's part of a trusting relationship. So I really like that bit that Nicola talked about, the relationships, and, that idea of starting by with yourself, and then moving into the group space. So Shirley, you've mentioned at a couple of points about the anti-bias approach, and I know you wanted to talk a little bit more about some aspects of that.
Yeah, I suppose just to focus a little bit on the goal, the anti-bias goals for children, which I think are really great. So it's one goal for children is to support each child's identity and their sense of belonging in the setting. So I think for the setting to have that inclusive culture, that is key. Okay, so children need to see themselves represented in the setting, and their family members also. Children, I suppose, children try to understand difference by imitation and during their play and through asking questions. They follow their lead from the adults then that are in their environment, okay, their immediate environment, their families, and the early childhood educators that they spend their time with during the day. And if an adult is uncomfortable with difference, the child will pick up on that. So that links back again to the importance of us reflecting on any biases that we have. So the Charter talks about, that we as adults our behavior will have an impact on children, and our outlooks and our attitudes will be visible to them. Okay, so, comments like, and we're not going to hear these comments, in an early learning and care setting, but in society, the wider society, you might hear comments like an adult might say to a child, don't stare, or don't ask about that, don't comment on it. But why not? Okay, and we support children's autonomy and their interest all the time. And this should be no different, I feel, that when children are curious about difference. So we need to listen to children, we need to ask their opinion, we need to provide an environment where they can and they feel comfortable, just like with adults, providing an environment where they can talk about their possible biases, but providing an environment for children where they can ask questions, give them a voice to tell you their opinions. Things like toys, books depicting different culture, abilities, different languages, all of that should be visible in the early learning and care setting for the children to engage with all of the time. So, for example, Avril Webster has a series of books, the Off We Go books, and they depict culture, I feel, and ability quite well. Having Braille books in the library, and I know that the Charter mentions that as well. In the last few years, we've seen a number of childhood favourites in Braille format, Good Light Moon, and The Very Hungry Caterpillar. And one of my 2-year-old, my daughter who's 2, one of her favourite books at the moment is the Braille version of That's Not My Elephant. Or there's a lovely book by Julia Donaldson called What the Jackdaw Saw. And Julia wrote this book with children who use sign language, and it's a lovely story that introduces a few signs, and the sign for party, which has gone down a treat with children that I've shared this book with over the years. So the importance, I suppose, of, having an environment that depicts, I suppose, difference, and not just, I suppose, with artwork or whatever it might be on the walls, in the toys that are in the environment, in the books that are in the environment, and so on. So I feel that is important as well.
Great. It's lovely to hear about Braille books and being that freely available, that they're not, it's not kind of as specialized anymore, and that, making ordinary of sign language and so on. So that's some great tips there. So Shirley, to wrap up, I know before we started chatting, you were saying about, that it's a busy time with Linc, and you've the level 6 and the CPD, and Maxine mentioned about the importance of the CPD and community of practice. So in conclusion, have you a little bit to say about how Linc engaging with the Linc program enables educators to engage with all the ideas that we've been talking about for the last little while?
Yeah, I suppose it was great to hear Maxine and Nicola's positive views of the Linc program, and they're great advocates of inclusion, like so many of our colleagues who work in the early learning and care sector. So the whole concept of, I suppose, inclusion, anti-bias, diversity, it's all enshrined in the Linc program, and the students who engage in the Linc Level 6 program are, I suppose, experience that, individually and as a group. So in relation to the Linc CPD program and that whole concept of a community of practice and so on that Maxine mentioned, so at the moment, we have over 2,000 of our graduates, 2,000 inclusion coordinators who have registered for the Linc program, which is just fantastic. So one of the key things that we wanted for the CPD program was to have a space where inclusion coordinators could come together, where they would have a space where they can come together, meet, discuss and talk about their roles, because we're very conscious that some of the inclusion coordinators may work in small remote settings and things like that. So one aspect of the Linc program that we felt that was very important was providing the space for INCOs to come together and to meet as a group. So we've included a virtual meeting space on the CPD program. So it's where INCOs can arrange a date and a time to meet through a discussion forum that's available for them. It's within the CPD program. And then there's a virtual space. Okay, so Moodle is the learning platform that we use in Mary Immaculate College and that we use for the Linc program. So there's a virtual meeting space. It's called Big Blue Button. where the inclusion coordinators engaging with the CPD programme, they can come into that meeting space anytime that they want. It's freely available to them. They can just have a chat with each other, who's available at this time, or are you interested in engaging in a communities practice? And they can set up a time and date to meet each other virtually. They can discuss topics, I suppose, that are being explored in the content of the programme, or follow on a conversation that they had in one of the tutor facilitated community of practice sessions. So we have two types of community of practice, I suppose, sessions for the inclusion coordinators. One is where they engage with the CPD tutor, Claire Butterley, and she facilitates a community of practice for inclusion coordinators who live and work in a particular locality in Ireland. And following that, then the INCOs can continue their conversation independently by themselves in this virtual meeting space. So we have a number of the inclusion coordinators who are really embracing that, and they are engaging in this virtual meeting space. But we're very conscious that some inclusion coordinators have set up their own community of practice, and they've told us that over the last number of years. And some have a wider community of practice where there may be different professionals from different, areas in a community of practice together.
Great. I think because I think that ongoing bit is so important. It's you do a program, you finish it, but then there's that bit about that you need the support of peers to keep on the road. So Shirley, thanks so much for such a reflective, thoughtful and practical discussion. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Maura.
And thanks very much to you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the word, and we look forward to your company next time.